Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tony Huey, and as Chair of the Board of Debating SA, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 2017 Debating SA Grand Final for the Open Division. We acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. We recognise and we respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with this land. Today is the culmination of another year of very busy and enjoyable debating. This year we've had a record 246 teams representing 56 schools across the 3 school sectors. I want to thank and commend all debaters who have taken part or contributed this year. I hope that you've learned about and improved your skills in the art and the craft of debating. And I hope that you've also enjoyed working with your colleagues and had a lot of fun along the way. We are always looking for debaters who are keen to move to the next step and become adjudicators. So if you're interested at all, anyone year 10 or above, and you guys, we'd be very interested if you're keen to take on debating adjudication training, which Debating SA will provide. So contact us if you're interested in pursuing that. Debating SA is totally committed to promoting and supporting debating as a highly valuable and worthwhile life skill for our young people. We are very honoured also to have the ongoing support and patronage of the Governor of South Australia, His Excellency Hugh Van Ley. I want to publicly acknowledge and formally thank James Tran, Sonia Lowen and David Morton for their unstinting commitment and hard work in organising and running our programs throughout the year, as well as providing training and resources for our schools. We thank the army of parents, coaches, teachers, adjudicators, families, supporters and helpers who have provided invaluable support right through the year in so many ways for all our debaters. We thank our host schools for so generously making available their facilities and their staff so that we can actually hold the debates. We're also grateful today, particularly to the Honourable David Spears, Member for Bright, along with his parliamentary colleagues for kindly and so generously facilitating our use of this facility for the Grand Final today. We also thank the Parliamentary House staff for their assistance. So what better place to be on this day to hear our top debaters than in this, our very own House of Assembly chamber in the Parliament of the State of South Australia, which stands as a very powerful symbol of our democracy, of free speech and rigorous debate. All the very best to our 2 Grand Final teams today, and I'm sure we're in for a very enjoyable and engaging exchange. So Madam Chair, without further ado, let the debating begin.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 2017 Open Division Debating SA Grand Final debate. My name is Matilda Simons, and I'm the chairman of this debate. The timekeeper is Katie Cozadorova. The topic of this debate is that Section 44 of the Australian Constitution needs revision. The affirmative team, seated to my right, is from Tatachilla Lutheran College, consisting of first speaker Jessica Elton, second speaker Matthew Patton, and third speaker Luca Provokopic. The negative team, seated to my left, is from Aberfoyle High School, consisting of first speaker Dylan Oliver, second speaker Alexandra Herden, and third speaker Eliane Moore. This grand final debate will be judged by a panel of 5 adjudicators, who are Miss Loven, Mr Carrington, Mr Hovey, Mr Morton, and Mr Wilkins. The speaking time of this debate is 8 minutes. A single warning bell will sound at 7 minutes, and a double bell will sound at 8 minutes. If required, a continuous bell will sound 30 seconds after the second bell, indicating that the speaker must conclude their speech. I ask that all mobile phones and other electronic devices be switched off for the duration of this debate. I declare this debate open and call upon Jessica Elton to open the affirmative case.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate this afternoon is that Section 44 of the Australian Constitution needs revision, and we, the affirmative team, strongly agree with this statement. To define this topic, we must first consider the Australian Constitution itself and the concept of citizenship. Firstly, I would like to particularly emphasise that revision does not mean amendment, and so the structure of this debate is strictly focused on revision rather than the process of amendment. Revision is defined as the act and process of revising, so encompasses not the amendment process, but the entire process of investigating the issues within this clause. The Australian Constitution was passed by British Parliament as part of the Commonwealth, taking effect on the 1st of January 1901. The Constitution consists of numerous sections, with Section 44 relating specifically to the legalities of holding a seat in the Australian Parliament. When considering the current political climate, we define the course of this debate as specifically referring to subsection 1, the issue of dual citizenship while holding office in the Australian Parliament. Citizenship is the position or status of being a citizen of a particular country. As first speaker, I'll be discussing the political aspects of this issue, particularly focusing on the system of constitutional monarchy and the internal political issues presented. My second speaker will be highlighting the legal and social issues exhibited, specifically discussing the archaic terms and disenfranchisement that is exemplified. My third speaker will rebut the opposing team's argument and furthermore demonstrate that Section 44 of the Australian Constitution demands revision. Before I move on to my first point, I will begin by highlighting the context of this debate and further exploring the reasons that this issue is currently under discussion. The Australian political climate is currently revolving around the first subsection of Section 44 of the Constitution, after many politicians have been found to be harbouring dual citizenships in Parliament. The section has been under scrutiny for many years now, with an inquiry led in 1996 by the House of Representatives Standing Committee on Legal and Constitutional Affairs. This occurred again in 2003 when Senator Brown's bill was put to the vote, securing the majority of votes in the chamber, but fell short of an absolute majority by just 3 votes. On the 30th of October 2003, the Senate passed a motion moved by Senator Andrew Bartlett expressing the Senate's view that sections 44.1 and 44.4 of the Constitution should be amended, demonstrating the historical prevalence of this section requiring review. The High Court is currently reviewing Section 44 in the trial of these politicians, and therefore this has become a prevalent issue within our political climate, and hence why this debate is revolved around this issue. My first point is that Australia is a constitutional monarchy and a member of the Commonwealth, meaning that our laws and values should reflect that of our motherland, Britain, and by extension, the Commonwealth. Political reporter Matthew Doran highlighted the fact that it wasn't until the late 1940s Australians and New Zealanders were still considered to be British subjects, as the concept of citizenship in both Australia and New Zealand was not yet established. When the Constitution was drafted and ratified, Australians, Canadians and New Zealanders were deemed as British subjects, and none would have been classed as subjects of foreign power. This emphasises Australia's significant homeland connection to Britain, and moreover demonstrates that Section 44 of the Constitution is utterly absurd when considering the possession of an Australian-British dual citizenship, as the two are almost synonymous. Clearly, Section 44 is in dire need of revision. It was not until after the 1999 case, Sue versus Hill, that the Australian High Court declared that those with second passports from Britain, Canada and New Zealand were subjects of a foreign power. Loyalty to Australia under the constitutional monarchy means loyalty to the Queen and to Britain herself, and evidently this case only emphasises the vastly illogical nature of Section 44, as it entirely ignores Australia's British heritage and connection to the other members of the Commonwealth. Therefore, it is clear that Section 44 of the Australian Constitution presents a strange paradox in the context of our system of constitutional monarchy, and hence desperately requires revision. Additionally, the majority of countries under the Commonwealth do not have this clause in their constitution, placing Australia in the minority. The major countries of the Commonwealth, Britain, Canada and New Zealand, all allow dual citizenship in Parliament. Does this not demonstrate that Section 44 needs revision? Clearly this clause is outdated and demands revision, a sentiment that will be continued by my second speaker. My second point is that there is an issue of internal political factors that render Section 44 as a severe disadvantage to the Australian Parliament. Currently, the Australian political parties are engaged in a trivial game of exposing their opposing MPs for harbouring dual citizenships for their own political gain and to sabotage the opposition's administration. In November 1992, the House of Representatives Committee presented a petition to investigate the eligibility of the Liberal Party and Labor Party candidates, Mr Delacretes and Mr Kardamitsis, under sections 44(1), which was brought to light by none other than a politician looking for his own personal gain from this issue, Mr Sykes, an independent candidate in a by-election for the seat of Wills. Professor Colin A. Hughes, an academic specialising in electoral politics and government, stated that Mr Sykes amplified the law concerning Section 44 of the Constitution, which, as an independent candidate, was clearly to increase his own popularity and to sabotage the campaigns of Mr Delacretes and Mr Kardamitsis. Clearly, this demonstrates the dire need for Section 44 to be revised in order to avoid this trivial infighting that is detrimental to the Australian Parliament. Currently, Senator Barnaby Joyce of the National Party of Australia, Matthew Canavan, member of the Liberal National Party, Fiona Nash, member of the National Party of Australia, Katie Gallagher, member of the Labor Party, Larissa Waters, member of the Australian Greens, and Senator Nick Xenophon are all politicians that have been exposed for possessing dual citizenships in Parliament in a part of this frivolous political feud for popularity. David Fickling, a writer for the Bloomberg Review, stated that this issue is the world's most ridiculous constitutional crisis. A statement that encompasses the triviality of this ridiculous political sparring as it distracts the Parliament from functioning as intended. According to the Australian Parliament website, by definition, the Parliament makes laws, authorises the government to spend public money, scrutinises government activities, and is a forum for debate on national issues. A range of duties that cannot be undertaken and performed satisfactorily and harmoniously whilst political infighting is rampant throughout the Parliament, directly due to this absurd clause in the Constitution. Just one example is the $122 million plebiscite, which obviously demonstrates the difficulty of the Parliament faces in passing laws. Clearly, Section 44 calls for revision due to the frivolity of the political parties in the jostle for popularity and aim to sabotage opposition. Conclusively, Australia is a constitutional monarchy and therefore should reflect the values and laws of her origins, Britain, a country which allows dual citizenship in Parliament, validating the need for revision of Section 44. Additionally, Australia is a member of the Commonwealth and hence should reflect similar laws of the majority of the members, of which do not have such a clause as Section 44, clearly demonstrating that it desperately requires revision. Furthermore, the political infighting and frantic race for popularity and sabotage of opposition ultimately undermines the functioning of the Parliament, which inevitably highlights the urgent need for the revision of Section 44 of the Australian Constitution.
I call upon Dylan Oliver to open the negative case.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is clear to our team that the interest in this debate topic lies in the recent revelations of spectacular failures of political candidates and our selection committees to properly interpret the clear requirements of the Australian Constitution. Good afternoon, Madam Chairman. The topic for our debate is that Section 44 of the Australian Constitution needs revision. We, the negative team, wholeheartedly believe this statement to be false. Now, it cannot be argued that Section 44 needs to be amended when its intent and wording is still as relevant today as it was when the Constitution was first drafted. Now, the first speaker has stated that by revising something, revising is not the same as amending. However, with the Oxford definition, which is requiring to be changed in order to correct an error or improve the meaning, they are the same. Now, today, as first speaker, I will be discussing two main points. These include the intentions and purposes of Section 44 as a whole, and why our politicians must declare exclusive loyalty to our country and be accountable to Australia and Australia alone, as well as potential national sovereignty and security risks. Our second speaker, Alex, will cover the complexities of changing the Constitution, as well as the High Court's role in interpreting it. Our third speaker, Eliane, will rebut and sum up our team's case. Now, on to my first point. The intention and purpose of Section 44 as a whole is to outline what factors can and will disqualify a potential senator or member of the House of Representatives. Individuals who have vested financial interests by way of employment or pension, are bankrupt and stand to profit by obtaining office, have shown a disregard for Australian law by committing a felony sufficient in severity to warrant a sentence longer than 1 year, or those who have conflicting interests due to holding rights granted by other sovereign powers, such as holding dual citizenship, are not eligible to stand for public office. Now, representing your fellow Australians in such a prestigious and powerful position is an honour in every sense of the word, and Section 44 is designed to ensure that their interests are the ones that politicians serve above all others. As Australia's lawmakers, politicians are some of the most influential members of our society, and so any influence exerted on them by a third party can be highly detrimental to the public. Therefore, it only makes sense to ensure that representatives of Australia are well versed in the Constitution and abide by it and it alone. Now, eligibility will always be a relevant factor when it comes to electing these representatives, unlike, for example, the armed forces, where physical requirements may be loosened in times of global conflict, because unlike soldiers, politicians have the responsibility and the potential to have a lasting impact on the laws and policies that will dictate the lives of the Australian public now and well into the future. And therefore, changing the terms of eligibility as declared by Section 44 to be more lenient will only serve to jeopardise the security of the public at large, especially when at any point in time it is fully within a person's power to adjust their own circumstances to comply with the current requirements of Section 44, should they wish to hold a place in Parliament. Now, for example, Larissa Waters, one of the initial politicians who resigned during the controversy over dual citizenships, has since announced in a tweet that she has renounced her Canadian citizenship and is planning on recontesting, illustrating exactly the dedication to protecting the interests of the Australian people above her own benefits and demonstrating the core values that an Australian politician must hold near and dear. Now, it is their job to change law and policy to support and uphold the freedoms of the people of this nation, and Section 44 is crucial to ensuring that this is their sole intention. Now, on to my second point, Section 44, subsection 1. Before representatives take their seat in Parliament, they must recite the Oath of Allegiance, which states that they must be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law. Now, how can we expect these members of Parliament to adhere to the Oath of Allegiance if they're not even capable of adhering to the eligibility criteria? The intention of Section 44, subsection 1, is to prevent a potential conflict of interest and loyalties that may arise as a result of a Member of Parliament holding dual citizenship. The rights and privileges that citizens have varies from nation to nation, but some of the most common ones include, but are not limited to, the ability and right to receive welfare, benefit from subsidised healthcare, and vote in elections. And with rights and privileges such as these, a dual citizen would not solely have Australia's best interests at heart, and as a result, a conflict of loyalty could possibly arise. Now, what motivation do they have to act only in the best interests of Australia with these rights and privileges? And would it be so unreasonable to expect politicians serving Australians to only represent Australian interests? Now, surely if politicians don't make a conscious decision to relinquish all other allegiances and loyalties, they are not suited to be involved in the governance and safety of the Australian society. The criteria that is currently used to disqualify potential candidates is fair and just, only seeking to ensure the security of the Australian people. Allowing those with conflicts of interest or criminal past to represent our constituents in one of the highest positions of power not only violates their trust, but also places our national sovereignty and integrity at risk. So, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we, the negative team, strongly believe that Section 44 of the Australian Constitution does not need to be revised. To put it simply and bluntly, if it is not broken, do not attempt to fix it. Thank you.
To continue the affirmative case, please welcome Matthew Patton.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair. As aforementioned, this afternoon we're debating that Section 44 of the Australian Constitution needs revision. As a member of the affirmative team, I'd like to reiterate the stance of both myself and my compatriots. We strongly support the revision of Section 44 of the Australian Constitution. As stated prior by my first speaker, the affirmative team would like to place an onus on Section 1 of the faulty, outdated, archaic clause, of course due to the current political and social context outlined by my first speaker. As a second member of the affirmative team, I'll firstly rebut the outlandish claims of the negative team. I'll then bring to light and summarise key legal concepts and investigations into the controversies and issues relating to Section 44, subsection 1. As well as this, I'll briefly evaluate the legal and social concept of citizenship in relation to Section 44. I will conclude by highlighting the necessity for this issue to be resolved in order to prevent millions of Australian voters from becoming disenfranchised and disregarded, thus reaffirming the need to revise Section 44 of the Constitution in order for it to adequately reflect the modern beliefs of the wider Australian community. Firstly, I'd like to rebut the claims of the first negative speaker, who discussed the issues with security risks of politicians holding dual citizenship. However, I'd like to reiterate that the notion of divided loyalty can be quite easily dealt with by Commonwealth legislation, not constitutional clauses. Furthermore, by questioning the allegiance of these elected parliamentarians, are we not undermining the Australian voters, the people who have voted these parliamentarians into office? As well as this undermining the personal origins of parliamentarians. In terms of the conflict of interest and renouncing citizenship, which the first speaker discussed, this doesn't delete their apparent allegiance to their connected country by telling someone to, or forcing someone to renounce citizenship. It doesn't remove the origins of that person, and it never will. I'll now delve into the key and irrefutable concepts and facts of this afternoon's debate, in the urge of highlighting the fleeting necessity for revision of Section 44(1) of the Australian Constitution. My first point regards one of the irrefutable legal documents supporting the argument and conclusions of the affirmative team, An official investigation into the controversies of Section 44 was compiled by the Standing Committee on Legal and Constitutional Affairs and tabled in the House of Representatives in 1996. The independent committee provided damning evidence and suggestions regarding their interpretation of the obsolete section. Irrefutably, the committee deciphered a number of faults within Section 44 and subsequently ruled in support of the affirmative team's argument. The Standing Committee officially concluded, and I quote from the final abstract of their investigation, "The committee concludes that the community would be better served if the current provision were to be amended and the primacy of Australian citizenship recognised in the Constitution." These conclusions and findings irrefutably support the need for revision of Section 44. This official report, tabled by a House of Representatives committee in Parliament, simply cannot be refuted. The committee further raised questions with regards to the applicability of this clause in the Constitution. The committee outlined a variety of archaic and ambiguous language discrepancies within Section 44, subsection 1, clearly highlighting the need for revision in order for it to accurately reflect the values of modern-day 20th century society. For example, this is a section which utilises the archaic word subject, implying that one is not a member of a democratic society, but rather that they are a subject of a totalitarian and arbitrary state. This is also a section which utilises the ambiguous wording under acknowledgement of allegiance, obedience or adherence to a foreign power, and entitled to the rights and privileges of a subject of a foreign power, verbatim which yet again requires clarity and revision of Section 44. The late MP, Mr. Bob Charles, insisted upon the absurdity of the language within Section 44, within the committee's findings. With regards to the legal entitlements, Charles commented in accordance with the Standing Committee. In the modern context, there are pension and social security systems which accrue rights to individuals as citizens of one nation, which remains theirs absolutely notwithstanding they have left the country, sworn allegiance to Australia and renounced any prior citizenship. Furthermore, the Standing Committee states, with reference to Charles's comments, it is virtually impossible to relieve an individual who is born overseas of all their potential residual rights in the country of their birth or a prior country of occupation. Hence, Mr. Charles and the Standing Committee evidence the need for clarity within Section 44 of the Australian Constitution. The specific language within the section remains unchanged from the time of Federation. Thus, the committee has underlined the clear limitations within the wording, particularly in an advancing and ever-changing climate. My first point, therefore, may only support the need for revision of Section 44 of the Australian Constitution in order to appositely reflect the modern climate in which it now presides. My second point will centre around the society and citizenship, yet another issue raised by the committee. I must again reiterate, citizenship in Australia is not a constitutional concept. As such, the defining and creation of laws regarding citizenship remains uncertain. Although, according to Section 51, subsections 19, the Commonwealth has a power to naturalise aliens. Hence, by convention, the Commonwealth holds responsibility for lawmaking in this area. I'll briefly add to this by stating that it is absolutely absurd that Australians should be disqualified from holding office based on dual citizenship, when firstly, the concept of Australian citizenship existed 40 years following the creation of Section 44 in the Nationality and Citizenship Act 1948, and secondly, at the time of the committee's findings, approximately 5 million Australians were eligible for dual citizenship. Furthermore, this number has continued to grow over the last 30 years. Figures as high as 50% of Australians are now purported to be eligible for dual citizenship, thus would be ineligible to represent an electorate in Parliament according to Section 44 in its current form. Let us fathom this for one moment. Close to 50% of Australians, citizens of one of the most progressive democracies in the world, disenfranchised and unable to represent their community's beliefs due to a redundant and unsuitable section of the Constitution. Australia is undoubtedly an extremely diverse and multicultural society. This is what we take pride in, whether we like it or not. As such, our laws and Constitution must reflect the views of Australians in modern society. Therefore, excluding a large portion of the population from standing for election is simply the greatest mistake. By simply disqualifying assiduous and adept parliamentarians from office based on an antiquated technicality such as Section 44(1) is farcical. By supporting the prolongations of this faulty and obsolete clause, the Negative team and its supporters are undermining the democracy of Australia, disregarding the thousands of votes placed upon by candidates whom have become embroiled within this saga, and overlooking the multicultural nature of Australian society. To conclude, the affirmative team would like to suggest that the subject of qualification and disqualification of senators and members is in general completely ill-suited for inclusion in the rigid composition of the Constitution. It is necessarily intricate and technical, thus must operate in relation to a body of public and private law and to social conditions which are in constant flux. If general and form, such provisions give rise to the numerous problems of interpretation as aforementioned. This is why, ladies and gentlemen, in October this year, the High Court must and will rule in favour of the affirmative team's argument and deem the relevant parliamentarian's election valid. The High Court's action in itself is a process of revision and all but solidifies the affirmative team in today's debate. Ladies and gentlemen, it is imperative that Section 44 of the Constitution be revised. This is an absolute necessity for the progression of Australia's parliamentary democracy and representative government. Thank you.
To continue the negative case, please welcome Alexandra Hurd.
At the core of this debate, it is crucial to clarify that issues with human responsibility cannot be remedied by constitutional change. We should not change the rules of the game because some players do not follow them. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for today's debate is that Section 44 of the Australian Constitution needs revision. We, the negative team, wholeheartedly disagree with this statement. Today I'll be explaining the impracticality of changing Section 44 over 3 points: referendums, responsibility, and the role of the High Court. Before I go on, allow me to clarify our definition and allow me to correct some of the misconceptions the affirmative team have attempted to convince you of. Firstly, we would like to clarify our definition of revision to mean, according to the Oxford Dictionary, to revise with the intent to change, mostly for the better. The affirmative team disagrees with our definition of revise, as this topic does not specify amendment. However, this makes little sense. What is the point of reading over the Constitution without intent to change it? While our team believes that changing the Constitution in order to solve this problem will create more issues than it remedies, arguing to look over Section 44 and then move on without intent to change perceived problems is futile. The affirmative team also seems to believe that this debate is about Section 44, subsection 1 specifically. However, the topic concerns Section 44 as a whole, and it is so much more than this current citizenship debacle. While some parts of the Constitution admittedly grow outdated, it is hard to argue that disqualification mechanisms for politicians have lost relevance, as I will go on to mention. The first speaker mentioned the 7 members of Parliament currently affected by this debacle. Just because this is a temporary inconvenience caused due to the oversight of political parties in vetting their candidates, it does not mean that the Constitution should be altered to accommodate their failure to comply with the law. Whilst it may be true that citizenship laws have changed greatly, as the first speaker mentioned, the intent of Section 44 is still relevant today. We should not change the Constitution because of oversight and inconvenience. We also argue that Section 44 has already been revised by standing committees, as the affirmative speaker has mentioned. However, revision is all well and good, but without change, what is the point? What will revision achieve? The second speaker also stated that Section 44 is ambiguous. However, as I'll go on to mention, the most credible constitutional experts of this land in the High Court have called this section and its wording, quote, clear. The second speaker also seems to believe that Section 44 undermines Australia's diversity and multiculturalism. On the contrary, we have had a British-born Prime Minister and have parliamentarians from across the globe representing Australians. There is no issue with this. The issue is where parliamentarians are unable to follow constitutional law. Now on to my first point, the principle of revision. And according to our definition, our team believes that revising the Constitution requires actual change to its wording. And let's be frank, the current situation relating to the interpretation of subsection 1 is admittedly an inconvenience, but it is a temporary one. A temporary inconvenience that does not warrant the monumental costs and disruption of a move required to change the Constitution, solely in order to accommodate aspiring politicians who are too lazy to read the Constitution and identify their own possible citizenship conflicts. The only valid legal route to effect any actual change is a lengthy, expensive and likely doomed referendum. According to the Australian Electoral Commission, the 1999 constitutional referendum to become a republic cost approximately $66.8 million, or, adjusted for inflation, $95 million. The sad truth is, ladies and gentlemen, that referendums are extremely expensive. Not to mention the low success rate of past referendums, with only 8 out of 44 succeeding. Referendums should only be employed on issues of major importance that could affect the way in which we live for generations to come, and a handful of empty seats is hardly an issue of that magnitude. Additionally, referendums are usually concerning sections of the Constitution which are outdated, no longer relevant and discriminatory. A key example is the 1967 referendum concerning Indigenous rights, wherein the population voted overwhelmingly to remove intentionally racist laws. In this very instance, though, what is prejudicial about expecting our representatives to not be bankrupt or felons, or to be beholden to the laws and obligations of other countries? Over 100 years later, the criteria in Section 44 are still relevant and fair, and the wording is sufficiently malleable that it can be reinterpreted to stay current without requiring a physical change to the Constitution itself. What is the benefit of changing Section 44? If you make it more lenient, the only benefit is that prospective politicians have one less hoop to jump through. If you change it to make it more specific, the narrow wording may not hold up over time, forcing another revision to be made. We do see the merit in amending the Constitution to modernise it in cases of flagrant discrimination. But in this instance, Section 44 must remain unchanged as its wording and intent is still undeniably relevant. This leads me to my second point, why Section 44 is not discriminatory. Claims of Section 44 excluding as much as 23% of Australians who are born overseas from holding office are unfounded and shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how the section operates. A prime example is Tony Abbott, somebody born in a foreign country who denounced his British citizenship a year before he was elected to Parliament and is therefore fully eligible to hold office. Renouncing citizenship and all rights conferred by another country can be done easily and at any time, and does not mean that individuals would have to denounce or renounce their cultural identification with their countries of origin. This applies even where we have a relationship that is as close to us in a shared history and law as Great Britain. Australia is still a sovereign nation, and the interests of Australian politicians should be undivided. As our first speaker mentioned, the oath taken upon being sworn into office as a parliamentarian requires the candidate to swear faithfulness according to the law. Therefore, if they, as potential lawmakers themselves, are ignorant of constitutional law, then how could they be eligible or suitable for the office? Ignorance of the law is no defence either. Prospective candidates for both Houses of Parliament receive information kits spelling out boxes that need to be ticked to qualify, and compliance with Section 44 is a huge part of this. The vast majority of the thousands of people who have successfully stood for elected federal office have managed to comply, and why is it so unreasonable to expect the current parliamentarians to do the same? Ladies and gentlemen, we the negative team wholeheartedly believe that Section 44 does not need revision. For the reasons I have outlined, including the difficulties of changing Section 44, we unequivocally believe that revising the language of this section is not only unnecessary, but futile in the long term, as will only create more problems than it solves. If it isn't broken, don't fix it. Thank you.
To conclude the affirmative case, I call upon Luka Korokovic.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chairperson. Today we are discussing whether Section 44 of the Australian Constitution needs revising. As the affirmative team, we believe that Section 44 must be revised, meaning not only amendment, but also investigation of the issue. We maintain that the focus of today's debate is subsection 1 of Section 44, as it is of critical relevance as it is going to be investigated by the High Court later this year. First off, I would like to address the negative team's rejection of our definition of revision, claiming that it is the same as amendment and that the only option for amendment would be to go to referendum. The third speaker of the negative team directly contradicted this statement in saying that the law has already been revised by state committees. Therefore, we could approach this rather than going through a lengthy referendum process, as was a key argument. I would like to go back to what the first speaker said about bankruptcy, opening their speech saying that bankrupt politicians aren't reliable and that they should not be able to hold positions in Parliament. I would like to maintain that this entire statement is irrelevant to the debate, as we've clearly defined the debate to include only subsection 1, which is dual citizenship. Also, there was discussion as to why the terms of eligibility should be disobeyed, and that was because they're archaic and destructive. They need revision. They're getting in the way of our democracy. And then there was also talk of the oath of allegiance, saying that if the oath of allegiance is sworn, then it's contradicted by dual citizenship. However, the key difference is that the oath of allegiance is a legally binding document, which, if you break the oath of allegiance, it's classed as treason, therefore securing the allegiance to the country regardless of citizenship status, which does not have the same condition to it. And the first speaker also finished their speech by saying that if the law was not broken, it does not need fixing. However, our second speaker presented a bunch of evidence in the form of the investigation through various Australian legal experts that suggests that this is indeed broken and that it is getting in the way of our Australian democracy. The second speaker then frequently referred to inconvenience in changing the laws through referendum. And as the affirmative team, we would like to argue that a slight bit of inconvenience is significantly better than facing uncertainty at the end of every Commonwealth and state election. The second speaker then mentioned that subsection 1 is not relevant as we are discussing the entire point. However, we do maintain that subsection 1 is of vital importance and the focus of this debate, as it is under review. And if a single subsection of the law, of the section, is obstructing our democracy, surely the entire section would need review and that would need to be altered. There was also mention of the revision of the State Committee, which again reiterated the lack of a necessity for a referendum. However, the cost of the referendum was also brought up, $95 million to be precise. And I would argue that this $95 million cost is quite reasonable in comparison to the money being spent by our current government in the form of a $122 million non-binding postal plebiscite. In contrast, this referendum would actually, cause a significant benefit to our political system and would be binding. Once this referendum is passed, the law is brought into place, therefore justifying the cost. Also, the negative team claimed that the language used in this document is entirely valid and non-archaic. And I would ask if that then means that they're disagreeing with an entire panel of legal and constitutional experts without any actual evidence. There was simply the statement that it's not archaic. There was nothing to support that. It was just a baseless statement. There was also the constant mention of politicians being too lazy to read the Constitution, implying that many of these politicians were intentionally breaking the Constitution in doing this, or that they had no knowledge of the Constitution. However, this is simply a farce. these politicians were very aware of the Constitution. However, many were just simply not aware that they were eligible for dual citizenship, as it was the tiniest little circumstances that got many of these politicians tripped up, that even their parents weren't aware of. Also, citizenship does not equal allegiance. As stated again, there was the conflict of interest question. One can have allegiance to a country while holding citizenship with another country. That's exactly why we have the oath of allegiance. It secures exactly that idea. And so, to reiterate the points of the affirmative team, our first speaker mentioned the various historical attempts to amend this law, and therefore highlighting the relevance of this, pointing out that it's not only a temporary inconvenience, it's a constant blight on the entire Australian Constitution and the political system. There was then mention of the constitutional monarchy and our connection to Britain and the entire Commonwealth, and how this law excludes dual citizens within the Commonwealth from holding a position within Australian Parliament, which again contradicts the law, because originally it was written before citizenship was a concept within Australia and New Zealand. Therefore, by using the term subjects of another power, this term, subjects of an Australian power, it meant the Queen of England. It meant all Commonwealth countries would have been accepted. However, since then, because of the nature of the way in which it is written, they are now excluded. On top of this, the first speaker mentioned how this is a non-existent law in other Commonwealth countries, showing how, again, we're not reflecting the values on which our country was built. Finally, my first speaker mentioned how this frivolous law, not only does it undermine the entire sanctity of our democracy, but it allows for politicians to essentially waste their own time and the time of their compatriots squabbling amongst each other and trying to undermine one another, rather than actually making decisions that benefit the Australian people. Our second speaker then spoke about a report of experts in Australian law, showing a strong legal consensus in the necessity of this change. And then the archaic language was repeatedly spoken of and was supported by these experts, showing the clear issues that it presents to Australian democracy. Our second speaker also highlighted that citizenship was not a concept until 40 years after the Australian Constitution was written. Finally, our second speaker highlighted the high number of Australians that are eligible for dual citizenship, showing how perhaps even a minority of Australians would be the only ones able to represent our country and our people. And for these reasons, the affirmative team would like to restate that Section 44 of the Australian Constitution demands revision. Thank you.
To conclude the negative case in this afternoon's debate, I call upon Eliane Wall.
In the words of Ernest Benn, politics is the art of looking for trouble, finding it whether it exists or not, diagnosing it incorrectly, and applying the wrong remedy. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of this debate is that Section 44 of the Australian Constitution needs revision. And I would like to take some time now to demonstrate how the affirmative team have found trouble brought to light by the recent controversy over the eligibility of many of our current members of Parliament, have misdiagnosed it as being due to the Constitution itself, and are proposing entirely the wrong remedy, revision of its wording and amendment. I shall then conclude by summarising my own team's case. As there has been disagreement between our teams on the definition of revision, I would like to reiterate that the topic specifically states that the body to be subjected to revision is section 44. And as per our definition, revision would take the form of legally changing the wording of that section, as reinterpretation of section 44 or examination of section 44 does not require any resultant change, whereas revision, in order to make progress, does. It was stated by the first affirmative speaker that we are a nation resulting out of the Commonwealth. Australian citizenship is almost synonymous with many Commonwealth citizenships, and therefore there should be no issue between those holding dual citizenships with other Commonwealth countries. However, this argument completely ignores the very concept of sovereignty. The reason we have a constitution in the first place is because we are a separate nation. We have not been a British colony, nor subject to their laws, since 1901, and so it is absolutely necessary that we ensure our politicians act solely in Australia's interest, and that is what Section 44 is designed to do. Just because many other Commonwealth countries do not have a section such as Section 44 does not mean that it is somehow irrelevant in our own constitution. They also attempted to cast the current controversy as being due to the wording, some inherent fault in Section 44 itself. However, this is a temporary, short-term issue, caused not by an inherent fault, but by a failure of Parliament's administration to properly execute the wording of Section 44 and its intention during the vetting process of an applicant for public office. This issue is not of sufficient magnitude, such as the third speaker tried to imply, to warrant the lengthy, costly, permanent referendum process required to revise the Australian Constitution. And it is unlikely that such a referendum would even be successful, as 82% of the referendums in Australian history, the majority of which addressed issues with a far greater scope and impact than a few empty seats in Canberra, have failed. The truth is, if Section 44 had been properly implemented as it currently stands, the first time around, this controversy would never have occurred. The second affirmative speaker has tried to convince you that Section 44 is somehow discriminatory, as a large portion of our population is excluded from it. However, a person may become eligible again at any time of their own volition by renouncing any citizenships they hold, which in many cases is a very simple and straightforward process, just as someone holding an office of profit can become eligible again by withdrawing from that office. Section 44 does not apply retroactively, so at any time, anyone may choose, if they wish to join Parliament, to make the arrangements necessary to satisfy its requirements, as evidenced by the fact that earlier this year, the Court of Disputed Returns within the High Court rejected a challenge to the eligibility of Independent Senator Lucy Kikuchi, which was based around her previous Kenyan citizenship. Furthermore, rejecting the citizenship of another country is a choice that any individual may make, and that does not mean that they also renounce their cultural heritage. The second speaker also claimed that the language of Section 44 is archaic and ambiguous, and the third continued this statement and asked whether we are disagreeing with a panel of experts on this matter. Yes, the wording of Section 44 is not as precise as it possibly could be, but this is because the language has been cleverly designed in order to maximise its versatility. It can be interpreted and reinterpreted by the High Court in different ways as required without having to change the wording of the Constitution itself. Revising the language to make it more specific would only serve to limit its ability and to adjust to accommodate future changes, and may give rise to a legitimate need to change it yet again as circumstances evolve. Similarly, Calling the language archaic ignores the fact that in 50 years to 100, it is highly likely that our modern language that we would have used would also become outdated. So why change a wording that the High Court already regards as perfectly understandable? The third speaker, again, has tried to claim that a referendum would be a good thing and that, if anything, this is the optimal solution if a revision to the wording of Section 44 needs to be made. Again, there is a much easier, less intensive solution than slogging through the arduous process required to host the referendum needed to revise the Constitution. It just means that perhaps there should be protocols put in place, such as a history check, so that during the application process, it is not the responsibility of the individual alone to ensure compliance with the Constitution. This is an issue with how thoroughly Section 44 is being enforced at an administrative level, not an inherent problem in its wording, design, or intent, and therefore any revision of the section itself is entirely unwarranted. The second and third speaker have both tried to assert that Section 44 is ineffective, as holding dual citizenship is not an act of disloyalty. However, citizenship is not just a title. It is a legally binding contract, and at best, those who stand for Parliament who are in violation of Section 44 demonstrate a lax or inattentive attitude towards the details of Australian legislature that is unacceptable in someone whose job it is to shape that legislature for the benefit of the Australian people. Section 44 is a safeguard against conflicts of interest and corruption, and seeks to protect the interests of the Australian people, the integrity of our political system, and the sovereignty of our nation as a whole. Our first speaker, Dylan, explained how it achieves this essential duty through first establishing the grounds on which an individual may be disqualified, and how in particular subsection 1, as it currently stands, is a fundamental necessity to ensure the undivided loyalty of politicians elected by the people to the people. Change is an inherent facet of life, but when it comes to Section 44 of the Australian Constitution, one thing is absolutely clear. If it's not broken, don't fix it. Thank you.
I call upon a representative of the adjudication panel to come forward and award the debate.
Thank you very much. I feel very privileged to have been able to listen to the debate today. It was excellent, and it's really good to see that the students did a lot of research into the topic. It was very interesting. It was a 4-1 split, and I'd like to congratulate Aberfoyle Park.
I call upon a member of the runner-up team from Tatachilla Lutheran College to give a vote of thanks.
We'd like to firstly thank Aberfoyle Park, obviously, for a very entertaining and interesting debate, and also thank you for the panel for obviously adjudicating our debate, and thank you to all the visitors as well who made it out tonight. So again, congratulations to Aberfoyle Park.
I call upon a member from the winning team from Aberfoyle Park to second that vote of thanks.
I'd just like to thank the affirmative team for a riveting debate, the timekeeper and chairman for their involvement, the adjudicators for the time they've spent towards the season. I'd also like to thank Debating SA for their continued support, and the South Australian Parliament for allowing us the opportunity to use this venue for this amazing hobby of ours. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance. I now declare this debate closed.